justice and be willing to have those conversations, be willing to get in that, get out of that comfort zone and talk about it. And so I just want to open up because again, it is a conversation. Each of you, in your own right, are kind of doing things that I would say would be championing these issues. So for me, just kind of talk about what you see. I know, Pastor, you've been on the forefront for some years now.
Yeah, well, you know, when it comes to criminal justice reform, I came out of the prison system in South Carolina. I was an employee. I was home for a while, so I saw a lot of the issues that needed to be addressed while I was there on a first-hand basis. So when I came out, and my life had taken a 180-degree turn for the good, now I had that experiential knowledge of the pitfalls that lead to recidivism. So that was the first area I started working in when I came out of prison, was trying to figure out how to reduce recidivism. So because of that, I had some ideas that hit the table that were not necessarily the status quo ideas. I'm not exactly the status quo person, including myself. But we have to definitely take a look at criminal justice reform is going to be effective. There's a lot of people that have ideas about how we're going to get people out of jail and keep them out of jail. But they're not looking at the reality of what these people in jail. Rehabilitation has got to start when a person is arrested and they're locked up. You have their full attention. And what better place to begin the rehabilitation process than while being incarcerated? The problem is, though, right now, jail for many, prison for many is 3 hots and a cot. Three hot meals and a place to sleep. And they come out and they're in no position to get out of staff. Many are coming out of prison with probation and parole, so they have these fees that they have to pay. But then when you come out, that's what a felony. When you apply for a job, you have to check that little box, which is totally unnecessary. But that puts the application of the person coming out of the prison system at the bottom of the stack right on your back. But you have these obligations over your head to the criminal system, probation or parole, supervision fees, how you're supposed to pay it, and you can't get it done. Most of those who go into the prison system, I was blessed because I was educated when I went in, so I was educated when I came out. Most of those who wind up in prison these days are not educated. So, and it's not a big push when you're in the prison system to educate. Getting work, there's so many things. Going back into the same neighborhoods that led to the incarceration. Not having access to better areas. Not having access to even the counseling that's going to get out. That's a big problem. The dual standards about African Americans in the judicial system from whites and
Well, you bring up a good point, Pastor, about the conditions that lead to a lot of mass incarceration. Sean, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know when you and I were both running for city council in 2015, and during that race, we had a number of conversations about this very thing. Especially in North Charleston, where we see so many of the conditions, and especially a higher incarceration rate, particularly when it comes to African Americans. We wanted to address it from the root cause, right? Knowing that oftentimes when we see prison, that's just a result of something that we've ignored for some time. What do you think about that?
Well, crime is a function of economics. So basically, if you're poor and you don't have an education, you're eventually going to start to commit crimes. Because, I mean, there's just a lot of money in the street. So one thing that I used to look at, because I used to find loopholes to hire people with criminal backgrounds. And I used to target ex-drug dealers and people who were in jail. And not to get off on a tangent, but what you said about the requirement to check that box. One thing that I'd like to see done is for employers to have to list on job applications the reasons when you would have to check that box and when you wouldn't have to check that box. Because a lot of my friends who have committed felonies and whatnot, HR isn't going to put it on the application, but if you look at HR policy, it's going to say if you were incarcerated 10 years ago, you don't have to check this box. Or if it was a drug charge and 3 years have passed, you don't have to check the box. The manager knows this. So when I was in desperate situations and I needed a body, you know, no skills, no nothing, I just needed a body, I used to tell the guy, be honest with me about what you did and tell me how long ago it was. As long as you didn't murder anybody, don't check that box. HR is never going to track it, because what they're going to end up doing is if you fill out a job application, they have to submit your application to a company to run your entire background. It's cheaper for them to do the background check for 7 years and under. After that, it costs them more. So when you hire a new employee, that employee is an investment. So since it's an investment and they don't know if it's going to be a 3-month relationship, they're going to go for that 7 years and under. So if you committed that crime 8 years ago, if you don't check that box, HR is never going to find it because they didn't pay for that. So that's something that needs to be put on job applications so that people who have had a past are able to still get that job, knowing that I don't got to check that box.
Now, do you feel like you got a good response from that, Sean?
Oh yeah, my guys always got hired. As long as they were honest. The only ones that I couldn't get through the cracks was the ones that lied to me. But as long as they were honest with me, and typically employers don't care about your background anyway. It's the person at HR that cares. Because usually, if I knew about a background, I'd usually have a direct line to a president or vice president somewhere in the company, and I'd say, look, I need this guy for so and so and so and so. If I don't get him on, I'm not going to be able to do this, this, and that. All they're looking at is dollar figures. As long as I can convince them this guy ain't going to steal, they don't care. So, I mean, that's a very important thing. But when it comes back to the economic causes of crime, I mean, you've got states like Arizona looking at third-grade failure rates, deciding how many prisons they're going to build. So another important thing is to really start to monitor what's going on with these third graders. Now, South Carolina, unfortunately, is one of the states that's doing messed up things. They just passed a legislation where a student could be a straight A student, but if they can't pass his exit exam, you have the option of holding that student back. That's something that was just passed in South Carolina. Are they already doing that?
Yeah, they have, and you know, that was part of the big education reform package. It's something that, you know, we wrestled with in the General Assembly for some time, because the reality is we felt like we were over-testing students, and these tests, these end-of-the-year exams, were seen to be the barometer of whether a student was deemed to be able to pass to the next grade or not. And part of that reform package was actually trying to get away with that very thing. And so I don't think that they introduced it, but more so tried to take it away because we recognized that that was having a negative impact on so many students.
Yeah.
But I'm with you on that.
Yeah, see, the thing about it is, I mean, it's just statistics. If you fail third grade, you're going to jail, period. That's just what it is. So it's important for there to be something in place to do something to get these kids past the third grade. Because once you fail, once you fall off on third grade, you're never going to catch back up. That's why down the street at North Charleston High School, you've got kids with 5th grade reading levels, and they're about to graduate high school. They're not going to be equipped to join the workforce, so what you think they're going to do? So you really got to look at things from an economic perspective, but you've also got to look at the education. The two go hand in hand as far as creating criminality.
And then look at the long-term effect of that also, the threat to our community that's being created in the process. So for every child that we don't educate, that winds up into choosing crime and entered in the prison system, and there's no rehabilitation available, the more unsafe our society as a whole becomes. And those same people that go into prison, they're coming out unless they die, which is a very small percentage. And when they come back out, they're coming out to communities just like this and other communities. And if there hasn't been a change, if there's no opportunity for them, they're going to go back to the life that they know, and they're going to perpetrate their crimes against the good people out here who are a lot of times
Now,
feeling safe.
How do we create that opportunity? Now, John, you work in the city of Charleston, and I know in your work, you've, you know, I know Mayor Tecklenburg has been very ambitious when it comes to how they develop the city, and particularly the people that they hire? I mean, is that something that the city of Charleston is trying to take into account?
Absolutely. We, we have to be very intentional about how we engage with the education system. From a community stance, right? Like it's important for us as citizens in the community to do things where we're able to go in and help guide and direct where we can. I've done some great work with some of the people around this table who, where we're going in and talking to kids and just giving them an opportunity to see that there is more out there than becoming a lawyer, doctor, or engineer, So just kind of exposing them to different opportunities and letting them know how we can shift what they think is an option for them. And showing them a pathway to do that. It makes sense to them and it's attainable to them. So that's a lot of kind of where our focus is on that.
That's been good, Jarrell. You want to add?
So for us in our entity, what we do is we try to create safe spaces for particularly African American males. And we do that using platforms that have already had historical connections within that community and making sure that we build that community. So we just had an event last night where we had practical conversations in the barbershop, and we opened that up to African American males 18 and up. Because one thing we wanted to do was to make sure that the voices of the African American males within Charleston and in all the silos were able to be heard and to create next steps for what their needs are and the resources that are available to them in this community.
What's an example? You talked about creating safe spaces to have these conversations. And describe the options without those safe spaces that might prevent those conversations from happening. Why the need for them in other words?
Well, the need for them is because there are none. Particularly in Charleston, there are not a lot of spaces for us to gather professionals, African American males, outside of maybe the schools or going to the mall or things that young people do. And so this need is something that allows for not so much confidentiality, but just a space where they can feel safe. Because safety is something that is not just given to people nowadays. Safety and feeling as though that you will be okay and that you will be able to live once you walk out of a space is not something that is privileged to this community on a day-to-day basis. And so making sure that there is something where African American males in particular can congregate, feel safe, can be transparent, and make it home later on that night is something that we want to continue to create.
KJ, what are some of those next steps? I mean, I know you've been on the ground for some time, and you and I collaborated on a number of things. I've always been impressed with some of the work that you're doing. Take me through some of those steps that you think you need to be taking.
Well, in short, first of all, I want to commend you because I've seen you on occasion acknowledge your privilege. And in terms of next steps outside of policy is understanding. And the goal in my mind would be to admit the realities of the system, right? We said this last night. Systems are not broken. The criminal justice system does not need to be reformed by those who are in charge of the system. It's working exactly the way they want it to work, right? And so in order for the system to be changed, we have to say that out loud. We have to get our leaders to admit that out loud, much how you have with your privilege and how that privilege has allowed you to do certain things. Because when we don't call a spade, it allows for doublespeak. It allows for people who are really good at changing topics, like instead of global warming, let's call it climate change, to make it not so scary. It allows people those opportunities to become thought leaders in things that don't actually provide change. And so I think calling a spade, letting everybody know what the real issues are, explaining the system, like we keep using this phrase, the system, but no one really knows how the system works. And how can you reform something or dismantle something or create a new something? We don't know how the current something works. And so I think demystifying what the system is, acknowledging that the system is here and it's working and it's doing a really good job for the people who want it to work, would be a step in the right direction. And once that is on the table, then we can start talking about policy change. We can start talking about, change in leadership if need be. We can take those next step conversations, but I don't know if as a nation we've really come to terms with what's really happening.
That's a good point. Jim, you have something to say?
Yeah, actually, to piggyback off what you said about calling a spade, I think the converse should be like agreed when we talk about like equality. I think equality is kind of like a drawn out word at this point since the 60s, mainly because like when we think of equality, we think of equality under the law, which in a sense I would say that we have. However, I think we need to think more about equity, i.e. socioeconomic equity. Equity in policy, for example, putting in zoning laws for the low socioeconomic areas that from industrial waste that aren't protected by historical sites in Park Circle, for example. It's about making those policies that focus on socioeconomic barriers that a lot of low-income communities have, that a lot of, unfortunately, white areas have had the privilege to ignore, because these policies automatically benefit them.
Remind me at the
Warren and Amanda, I'm Jerez's business partner. We've had some conversations, and a lot of these issues I think come up in our conversations as we talk with African American men. And we were speaking earlier about reparations and equity and how you establish that and dismantling the system at its core. And I think you're right that this nation has not dealt with what equality really is, and that is acknowledging all of its citizens as human beings.
Yeah.
So the rights that Beto O'Rourke has as a human being should be extended to every other human being that lives in our culture. And so then as you start to look at the specific issues, when you look at what these human beings' experience is in this country versus another set of human beings, and you begin to dismantle it in that way, I think then you can be honest about how do we attack the specific issues? How do we attack prison reform when we know that the human beings who end up in prison are brown human beings?
Would you also say, Ms. Mann, that's why why the conversation surrounding reparations has increased over the last several months, particularly? I mean, I remember when Beto spoke at USC, and that question came up from a young man about reparations and whether we support it. And I think a lot of it goes back to acknowledging exactly what was wrong, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, just by the very root word of reparation, we have to acknowledge the sins of our past. And so I think it touches on a lot of what you say. And I would love to see us move in a direction that at least acknowledges it and start having those conversations, as KJ said, because understanding is key. And I think oftentimes that's overlooked as to where we're at and knowing exactly how we got here before we can exactly know and decide where we need to go moving forward.
And I think KJ is exactly right that the current political system and what we've experienced over the last few years politically is not unintentional. People in South Carolina know the system is working just fine based on the people who established the system. And we have to deal with the intentionality of that and have our own attention. And I think why reparations continues to pop up is I think the more we talk about it, the more articulate we become about what reparations really is. And yes, it starts with the acknowledging of the sins of our fathers, but also then looking at, okay, how do you then dismantle and disengage the system without the fear mongering that somehow America won't be great if we then change what that system looks like.
So to that end, what do you think we need to be hearing on the national level, particularly with the crowded Democratic field for president in 2020, as it relates to that and an African American agenda going into 2020? Because the reason we're having these conversations, I think, particularly after 2016, African Americans continue to feel disenfranchised. We continue to feel like America is a place where we can't succeed economically, educationally, and get on a level where we're level with our white counterparts. So what is the conversation that I think, what do you think the conversation that needs to be had nationally as it trickles down?
I think the first conversation has to be who are we as America?
Okay.
And I think that question has been asked, I think, in a lot of political circles. The we has to be the majority of people who believe that all human beings have the same rights. There is a small minority while it's a very vocal minority and has been empowered over the last few years, that don't believe that all people are equal or should have access to the same things, I think that's the first thing, is that the we has to rise up and say, America is going to be a place where its citizenry is going to have equal rights across the board, every human being. When we are able to establish that the majority of people in America want a system where everybody can benefit, everybody has the same rights, everybody comes into the world, even is born into this situation with the same level playing field, then we can move forward and say, well, what does that then look like? That means everybody has a right to an education and to earn a living wage. Everybody has a right to be safe in their communities and their homes. Everybody has a right to have access to health care. So the issues are all anchored on that one question about who are we as America, and I think that's what we're struggling with. I think that's what all the candidates are coming in talking about from a variety of perspectives. But I think as we move into the debates, what all the candidates will be talking about hopefully is who we are when we say we.
Yeah, well, I would just like to add to that. I would like for the narrative to be changed. You know, we're a group of black people talking about what we would like to see specifically for African Americans, right? And so in my opinion, one of the things that I like to see changed is this narrative where we praise the select few who make it from these corrupt systems, and we look at them as the benchmark. So we say, Casey Gerald wrote a book called There Will Be No Miracles Here. And he was that person. You know, he came from Oak Cliff, Texas, really poor part of Texas, went to Yale, went to Harvard, blah, blah, blah. And so he was being praised as, you know, look at Casey. If Casey can do it, why can't the rest of y'all do it? And instead of looking at Casey and the Caseys and the KJs and the Seans of the world and saying, well, they made it from such and such, KJ went to Morningside, KJ went to Stall, we need to be changing the narrative to why in a country that is supposed to be so great, do we have so many rules and regulations that prevent people from having the same opportunity? KJ shouldn't be an exception. KJ should be the rule.
Right.
And so we have to have conversations that shift the narrative from praising those of us who make it out the mud and saying, well, why is there so much mud in the first place? You know, we talk about crabs in the barrel, right? Crabs are not supposed to be in barrels. Like, that's not their natural habitat. They're in the ocean. The ocean is wide and expansive. When crabs are in their natural habitat, they live their lives. They don't crawl over each other. They don't try to fight each other. How did he get in the barrel? Why are we talking about the barrel?
That's the way to put it.
You know?
Sean, yeah, that's something.
Yeah.
I like
This
the way
is
you
something that I never see brought up, and I've been out here for a while, and this is what I've noticed over a lifetime, really. The biggest question is black self-esteem. Okay? We talk about white privilege and all that stuff like that, but from what I've seen from being out here is that we ourselves believe in white privilege. I've managed at a lot of places where everybody in the workplace that I've ever had to fire or write up or let go looked like me. Okay? Because they didn't want to listen to what a black guy had to say. I could say one
Their
thing.
ice is colder.
Huh?
As you believe their ice is colder, as the old saying.
Yeah, exactly. White boy can come in there and say something way more extreme than I would, but they go to HR on me. Or they question why, you know what I'm saying? So, for one thing, we ourselves don't believe in black authority. You can see in the things that we see them say about Barack Obama. Barack Obama didn't do enough for black people, but Barack Obama did. I'm like, Barack Obama did more than Clinton and Bush did.
Well, I think as black folks, we also put them to an unfair expectation. I had this
Exactly.
conversation yesterday with someone, and I think, you know, with the historical nature of his election, as African Americans, and many of us in our community wanted him to be the savior of all of our people, all things related to our community. And the reality was that was a high benchmark to meet. And to your point about black self-esteem, I've wrestled with that in my conversations with people because I've seen it. And I've often wondered exactly how did it get to that point. And I think we have to look historically, and it kind of alludes to something this man said. You know, we are still living and seeing the effects and the vestiges of Jim Crow. and, you know, not being so far removed from it. And so I think that
Not
fact
just that,
can't
we're
be
still in
ignored.
Jim Crow. That's the point I'm trying to get to, we're still in Jim Crow. All right, I forgot what I was about to say, but I'll give you an example. There's a school district, I'm not gonna name it, but it's right outside of our county, we border it, okay? So, these people blatantly had a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and I think I might have told you about this, I'm not sure. I know I told you about it. But they blatantly, they really had a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for several racial instances. A couple of us banded together, we went out there, and we met them at a secret location, and basically told them exactly what they need to do. I think I told you about it too, Rajon. We told them exactly what they needed to do. Wrote down a battle plan, this is what you do. So, 2-3 days later, we get a phone call, and they say that they don't want to go through with what we told them to do because they're afraid of the repercussions. So despite knowing that they're in a current system that's going to completely obliterate their own children, they're going to sit there and let it happen because of fear of what can happen. So when we come to the self-esteem part, we have to ask a couple of questions. One, why do I as a black person need a leader in order to achieve anything in life? Why do we need a leader? Why am I not capable of myself being able to achieve what the white neighbor from next door that I grew up with is able to achieve? Like Chris Rock said, I'm a comedian. My next door neighbor is a dentist. Why does Chris Rock have to have a successful comedy career with millions of people buying tickets to his shows to have what a dentist has? You know, so why does a black person in a rural community have to be afraid to do something for the benefit of their own child for fear of what's going to happen to them? So we have to ask ourselves, why is it that we believe in white supremacy?
Jeremy, you had something to say?
I think I sort of have to respond to that. So I'm more of a history buff, so like I take it as you will. But I say that like one of the biggest problems is that the reason that we believe in white supremacy so much is because we've had it's been a very long process, but effective process in blotting out black history. I mean, we don't talk about during Reconstruction the 1,500 elected offices that black people held during Reconstruction. We don't talk about the senators like Robert Branch in Mississippi who held power, and we don't talk about the fact that the state house in South Carolina was majority black during Reconstruction. This history is so important to us because these are our leaders. These are the people that matter so much, and yet everything they do, everything they say has been silenced. I mean, instead of having a statue of Robert Smalls, we have a statue of, what's his name, Wade Hampton III on the State House grounds. Why aren't we taking the time to talk about this history? It's because that's the type of stuff that is so important to us, to our foundation as black people. To not only understand where we came from, but to understand what we can build upon.
I'd like to take it one step further, and then I do have to go. I have to get over to a strike line, fight for 15. I'm supposed to be out there definitely.
You're always on the front line.
I have to, and I apologize. But first off, thank you for this conversation, because I think that's the opening door to the dismantling of a system that's unjust. But to piggyback on what you're saying that we don't talk about these things. What we are was we're taught this, okay, in our educational system. When we look at the way history is taught, the way it's set up, in schools around the nation from an early age, we have little black children that are sitting and taught history where they have no heroes in, or very minimal heroes in, while little white children are taught that all of the heroes are there, even if it's a false history. Even if we look at Colonel Custer, who was a mass murderer, but he's glorified in the history books. The little white child will say, great. Little black child said, where my heroes at? Oh, I got one, and I got them 28 days a year. I got a couple of them. And so ultimately, that black child is saying, I have really nothing to be proud of. While that white child is saying, I have everything to be proud of. And year after year after year, this is impressed upon them. So when the child grows up, and they have the black child has these self-esteem issues, well, we haven't given them anything to be proud of. Unless it's an independent source, like we have a strong parent in the household, which is not the usual household in African-American communities, or we have a very liberal-minded white household where the parents are teaching correctly in that household. So, if we can rewrite the books, of course, we're still gonna wind up with certain, unconscious biases that's out here, you know, because there's some things we're not gonna get away with, get away from. The fact that angel food cake is white and devil's food cake is black. We're not gonna get away from white magic and black magic. We're not gonna get away from the fact that when you shoot pool, all of the colored balls are chased around by the white ball. And the way you win is you knock the white ball, black knock the black ball. And we're not gonna get away from that. But we can begin to build self-esteem within our children at an early age if we just write history the way history is written. Accurate.
Be accurate. I know you gotta leave, Pastor, but that gives us a perfect opportunity to introduce a good friend of mine, Rajon Lewis. If you kind of wanna talk, you know, kind of what you're doing, and just offer any commentary that you've got. I know you've been here for some time listening.
Yeah, exactly. First of all, great discussion, and thank you so much for having us. This is an amazing opportunity to really get face-to-face nose with you and really tell you about the things that we care about here in the community. My name is Rajon Lewis. By occupation, I am the executive assistant for the CEO of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, which is an organization that helps to develop, to help families who have acquired land to keep their land and to make money off of that land in a multitude of ways. By volunteerism, I am the executive director of Low Country Youth Services, which is an organization which is designed to create engaging programming for youth of the Low Country. We are a 100% volunteer organization. We have about 93 young men in our roster, and there are about 35 mentors and a staff of about 13, 100% volunteer. What's my job there is to create the programming that will keep young men out of situations that will otherwise not be good for them. Akil Dunn, actually one of our graduates of our program, the Distinguished Gentlemen's Club, and we are very proud of this young man as he sits here in front of us. I wanted to chime in sort of on the discussion where we start talking about education. My former profession, as of a week ago, was that of a fifth grade teacher. So when we talk about the teaching of history and the way history is presented to children, I think that is very important, and it's something that I took a very intentional approach to when it came to teaching education. I think this is something that you, as the President of the United States, would be able to help with when we talk about the appointments when it comes to education to the people who are making the decisions as to what goes into testing. Because the problem isn't that Black history isn't in the books. All of Black history is in the books. If you read through a textbook, there's a whole lot of Black history in there. The problem is it's not on the test. It's not in the standard document, and it's not on the test. So teachers are going to teach what's on the test. If the test was 100% Black history, you would learn 100% Black history in schools. But the test doesn't do that. The test is going to have 2 to 3 questions about Black history. They're going to ask about Martin Luther King. They're going to ask about Malcolm X. They may ask you about Brown versus Board of Education. They'll ask you, where were Black people during the war? During the Civil War? Well, they were slaves, or they fought for the North. Like, that's really the extent of what kids learn about Black history. My approach to teaching when it came to Black history was that whatever time period we were in, I made a point of it to show what the contributions of Black people to that era. Whether it be Reconstruction, whether it be during the Industrial Revolution, whether it be during the U.S. as a world power, which was that area right after the Industrial Revolution, right before World War I. Like, as we start talking about those areas there, like, you have to continue to add those parts. And I think that when you're looking at, cabinet appointments, should you become the President of the United States, when you become the President of the United States, that's something you should be paying attention to. How does this person that I'm putting in this position feel about African Americans? Because that talks about that self-esteem. When you don't have those heroes, when Black people only exist in a microcosm that is, we came here in chains to be slaves, and then magical Abraham Lincoln came, freed the slaves, and then Black people disappeared for 65 years until they pop up during the Civil Rights Movement. When you teach it that way, how do I feel proud of that? But when I know that during World War I, African Americans stormed the beaches of Normandy right with their white brethren, even though they were in segregated units. When I know that during the Great Depression, after what Black people came back from World War I, and were fighting the war and came back to segregated homes. After World War II, they decided to desegregate the military because of the contributions of African Americans during World War II. And then they still came back to segregated homes in America. When you understand that, and you talk about the continual plight of African Americans in America, now it's, we weren't just victims the whole time. I'm not a victim of this system. I have actually been victorious in this system because of the things I had to come through to get to where I am. So that's when you speak to that Black self-esteem, that's where that comes from. Now, I'm pretty sure you can't, deal with the problems of Black self-esteem in a more direct way, but if you're talking about ways to get to that,
But education's the way to do it. Education's everything. Everything that we know comes from a teacher. Everything that we know comes from a teacher. Whether that teacher's your parent, whether that teacher is an informal education, or that teacher's a mentor. Everything we know is through some form of teacher. So that's really what I wanted to say when it came to that. 'Cause I wanted to make sure I responded to that. That's a really key point and something I definitely believe that you can help us with.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
That's what I'm
It's really good.
Yeah, also remembering your position as future president of the United States, one of the most important things to remember about education here in the United States is there are 50 states. There are 50 different standards of education in the United States. Therefore, you have to really realize that, in essence, they will be unequal. Trying to find ways, like as president, to figure out what you can do with the Department of Education, figure out like ways that you can get over like the lackluster standards that some states have in response to like other states like Massachusetts. That's the first step into making places like South Carolina not the 48th state in education, like hands down.
To that, when it comes to testing, not all states test the same. That's another thing. When you talk about South Carolina as the 48th or 49th or 50th, depending on what year you're in, state in the nation, not all states test all students. So there are certain states that if you have an individualized educational plan, which is given to students with special needs, you do not test. There are states that only test their top 50% of their entire schools. So when you look at those numbers, in South Carolina is a state that's like, well, we're going to test everybody. If you can hold a pen, we're going to test you. If you can't hold a pen, we're going to test you on a computer. Well, how do you compare those things? That's apples and oranges. So there has to be a way to streamline that. Again, that's something when you're looking at, when we look at the people who are in those positions who are making those decisions right now, those aren't people who are interested in seeing a kid from North Charleston who struggled with reading have some kind of benefit. Like he's like, well, just make sure that he has the same opportunity to take the test as anybody else. Or states' rights, which has its own set of issues throughout the course of our country. So that's something you have to look at, is how are these states deciding on who's testing? Yeah. Because you can't say if we had the NFL and half the teams had to play 16 games and half the teams had to play 32 games. And then you put all of those teams, then you take all of those teams and say, okay, well, this team won 19 games. Well, this team only played 16 games. How can they win 19 games? It's not a fair comparison. We have to find a way to attack those things in a way that can truly address the issues that create this disparity between things. Also, teacher pay. I have to say this because I'm a former teacher.
Yeah.
Teacher pay is abhorrent. It's abhorrent. By professional degree, I believe that teachers are the lowest paid.
Is that part of the reason why you left? Just out of curiosity.
So that was one of the reasons why I left. One of the main reasons that I left is because of everything not related to dealing directly with children. I love working with children. I love seeing the light behind their eyes when they learn something that they didn't learn before. I learn when somebody learns to love themselves more because they learn how to do something they didn't know how to do. Like, I love that. What I didn't love was everything else about teaching.
We're getting ready to wrap up, but I did want to give an opportunity for anyone who wants to just kind of say a few final remarks, and certainly Mr. O'Rourke, I'll let you have the final remark as we get ready to conclude. Just kind of going in a circle, Jeremy or Kia, anything I want to say?
All right, no, I mean, like, I think we've covered a lot of bases in like this forum about criminal justice, about education, about the intricacies of how we need to fix these things. I mean, none of this stuff is going to be easy, let's be frank. But if we take the time to involve our citizenry, if we take the time to hear out all the ideas that we have here, like, I think there's something conducive that can be done. I would love if you could be able to be that person to do it.
No.
I think it's important to keep in mind the value of federally sustained economic empowerment for communities. So keeping in mind that we need to be very intentional about how we create legislation and how we create mandates and orders that will allow for communities to have direct access to funds that will allow them to build what they need on their own basis of understanding of what the needs are, without having to kind of go through several steps and processes in order to get there. Naturally, there's a lot of state-funded opportunities, there's a lot of municipal-funded opportunities, but we also need a lot of federal opportunities. We have to have a wide reach in which we can be able to go to and come from in order to build what we know we need for our own communities, and also what we want. So it doesn't have to be just like the necessary components, but also some of the things that we know we want to get ahead and to move the needle on what a community looks like.
Again, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I think one thing that I've heard from everyone is that the African American community is kind of surviving, and we're resilient. But I think the next step that I think we need to have is to make sure that we're thriving, and setting up things in place and having structures to make sure that African Americans in South Carolina and other states are thriving and enjoying life here in this nation.
I think the points that they made earlier, I really appreciate you coming out to listen to the voices, particularly of Black men. I think Black and brown people should be an integral part of the decision-making process. And so to have a candidate who values that and hopefully are in that position would see having Black and brown people involved in those conversations, not just as representation, but as voices for the issues themselves. The people who have lived those issues have to be a part of that solution. They can't just be on the sideline. So I appreciate it.
I don't have a comment, but I got a question if that's okay.
Sure.
After hearing all of the comments, what is your opinion on what Black people can do as individuals or collective in order to catch up?
I love what was said earlier about changing the conversation from fixing a given system, whether it's criminal justice or economic or healthcare or education, and acknowledging that the system is working exactly as intended and continues to reinforce itself and the hold that some have on power at the expense of others. In part by the stories that we tell. And Jeremy, I love what you had to say. I was in Beaufort yesterday, and we were at the grave of Robert Smalls. I didn't know his story. I didn't know that he commandeered a Confederate ship, brought many to freedom, then served in the state legislature, then served in the United States Congress, and importantly, didn't know that he served beyond the end of Reconstruction. I also take your point that on the State House grounds, we're honoring somebody like Benjamin Tillis, who was a white terrorist, proudly talked about killing African Americans, and then elected into the highest positions of public trust in the country, and is in a place of honor today. So that's the story that people are telling themselves and their kids when they go to the State House grounds. We were seeing a rendering of a memorial to Harriet Tubman, who spent 3 years in Beaufort, whose participation in the effort on behalf of the Union, I don't think I fully understood. Her work on intelligence and actually leading Americans in that war effort. And what was striking to me is that in the depiction of the memorial, the people who are looking up at the memorial are all white Americans and white children who today are not being taught this story because it's not on the test. Right. And teachers in high stakes, high pressure standardized tests are forced and rewarded for teaching to what is on that test right now. So that point hits home as well. So Sean, I think, listen, we have these very specific proposals about ensuring there's more capital in the community, in a capitalist society, making sure everybody has access to it, in reforming our educational system. And again, I loved your point. It's not just equality. So we know black schools are $23 billion underfunded compared to white schools, but it's equity. When a child in kindergarten is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or expelled if they're a child of color, then you have to have teachers who actually look like the students that they're teaching if you're gonna get to it. It's not just equality, it is equity. But it is systemic, it is foundational, and it frankly, as someone who's proposed some of these solutions, will not be solved by them individually. I think it comes back to the story that we tell of America. And to your point, Ms. Mann, when we say we, who are we talking about? Who's included in that? And certainly not all of us in this country right now. Any way you measure it, 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America today. We know that we are the most incarcerated country on the face of the planet, disproportionately comprised of people of color. And then something you said that really got me, and that's why I asked you the follow-up question. You talked about safe spaces, and then you talked about people being able to be safe when they leave that space. You know, I don't know the right word to use to describe what we need to do as a country, but it's not just leveling the playing field. It is protecting people from their country and those who hold positions of trust, including in law enforcement right now. And it's protecting from a criminal justice system, it's protecting from that kindergarten classroom, it's also protecting from who's polluting the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. Race is the best predictor right now on your proximity to a polluter, or the ability to guarantee that the water that you're drinking is going to be safe. We were in Denmark, South Carolina at Voorhees, and we were learning that they had been treating their water system with pool cleaner, and it is so fouled that you cannot drink the water anymore. It'll cost $15 million. The state has not been able to form the political will to make that investment. That's a role for federal leadership. So Sean, I don't know that I did a good job of answering your question, except to say that I understand that it is much larger than any given policy proposal or any part of the system, because it is systemic. And I will, in all humility, admit that I don't have the answer.
That's all I needed to hear.
Yeah.
Good answer. Good answer. Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
But you told me a lot that I didn't know too, so.
Thank you.
KJ, you got something to say, kind of close us up?
Nah, dude, what's been said has been pretty good, and so I'm just thankful for the opportunity and look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Sorry, I just want to say something real. My name is Maxwell Frost. I work for the ACLU. Sorry, I was late. As you know, we're currently doing our Rights for All campaign, where we're getting commitments from everybody running for president. And so I just wanted to bring up the topic really quick of allowing currently incarcerated folks to vote. In this country, 1 out of 13 African Americans, Black people, are disenfranchised, partly because of that system. And so what we're looking to do is get a commitment from everyone running for president that they champion the right to vote for every American, even if they're currently incarcerated, because it lowers the recidivism rate. And when we keep people involved with their communities, even when they're behind bars, they're less likely to reoffend when they come out. And this issue disproportionately affects Black people. And it's a tool of mass incarceration. In Alabama, 5% of prisons were Black. After black men got the right to vote, it went to 95 in the course of about 10 years. So not allowing currently incarcerated people to vote is a tool of institutionalized racism. And so we're looking to get commitments from everyone running for president to allow all Americans to vote. So
Yeah.
let's hear.
Yeah, Maxwell, so a couple of quick thoughts. One, I think if we're talking about systemic problems in storytelling and who we are when we're talking about we in this country, we know that there are institutional barriers to participating in our democracy. I was just in Georgia last week. Secretary of State purged hundreds of thousands of names from the voter rolls. But for actions like that, Stacey Abrams would be the governor of that state. My home state of Texas ranked 50th in voter turnout, not by accident, by design. The courts in 2017 found that based on race and ethnicity, you were likely to be drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power of your vote. And people made the logical conclusion that their vote did not count for as much as someone else's and did not vote. So we call for, and I will sign into law, a new Voting Rights Act. We call for same-day and automatic voter registration, and the registration of those who've been formerly incarcerated. That would bring 55 million additional Americans into registration. We could have tens of millions more participating in our elections. And then I'll get to the specific question you asked. We've got 2.3 million Americans behind bars right now, as we are all enjoying our freedom, disproportionately comprised of people of color. Many there for nonviolent drug crimes, and we know that all Americans of all races, they use and deal illegal drugs at the same rate, but only African Americans are more likely to be stopped, to be frisked, to be arrested, as Sean was making the point, to upon release be forced to check a box, which will diminish their opportunities going forward. Pastor Dixon, who had the seat before you, was talking about his experience. And that he was lucky to have been educated before going into that system, but that education denied to those who did not have it, healthcare denied, and voting rights denied. So if we're going to reduce the population imprisoned, if we're going to diminish the chances of recidivism, I think extending those basic human rights like healthcare, like education, and yes, for non-violent offenders, because I think violence breaks a basic compact between us. For non-violent offenders, which acknowledges that those who are behind bars, for example, for possession of marijuana, legal in most states in this country right now, should not be stripped of their basic rights of citizenship, given the racist dynamic of the criminal justice system. So I would support extending voting rights to those in prison for non-violent drug crimes, non-violent crimes.
Yeah, definitely. And just to provide some perspective on that as well, you know, I know people who do really bad things, right? And I'm from Orlando, Florida, and you know, I have friends and family that were affected by Pulse. So I understand that people do horrible things. But when we're talking about not allowing people who've committed rape, murder, things like that to vote, we're talking about people who are convicted, which obviously, you know, are disproportionately black.
Right.
We're not talking about just people who have done things like that voting, because there's more rapists outside of jail than inside jail. Those rapists and murderers voting right now all across this country. Just, we happen to disenfranchise all the black ones. And so when we talk about ACLU, we just came out in favor of reparations and we released a report on it. But when we talk about reparations, it's far more than just a check. We have to repair everything.
Yeah.
And in a country where if you can be convicted of a crime because of the color of your skin, well, we really believe that we can't take away the right to vote to anyone, because it's just, we're disenfranchising people. Again, 1 out of 13 black people in this country can't vote, and this is one of the biggest reasons.
And I'll let Rajon have the last word, and then if anyone wants to get a chance to talk with Mr. O'Rourke afterward. But this has been fantastic. So, Rajon.
I just want to once again thank you for having us. This has been amazing. Thank you, Martin, for doing this. Man, sorry, Representative.
Oh, it's all good. We go back.
We go back. This has been an amazing opportunity. I actually followed your race in Texas against Ted Cruz. I was really pulling for you. But I believe that God does all things well. And even maybe you losing that race opened the door for you to do this. So I'm grateful for that. I actually interviewed Jacob Gamble, South Carolina student for Beto, on my show. I have a show, Real Talk with John. Facebook. But I interviewed him on my show, and one of the things he was really staunch about you. I hadn't followed you much on the presidential race yet. I knew a lot about your run in Texas. But he really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and the main thing he championed was that Voting Rights Act. And he said that's really what drew you over to him. I hope that you continue to engage African Americans in these discussions, and when you start thinking about things like a cabinet, we've seen the way the cabinets have looked for the past few, I won't say few, all of the history of the president, and there's not a whole lot of minority representation on that. Even Barack Obama could have done better in that regard. As much of a Barack Obama fan as I am. I hope that you will make a conscious effort to make sure that you include those minority voices. And when I say minority, I definitely mean everybody else. But black people. I'm going to say black people because it's important that we have representation. We are represented in this country in a major way. We've talked about the ways that the system has worked against us and worked against our children and against our forefathers. But we want to be able to have a say-so on that. You see at this table, you see we have intelligent voices, diverse voices. None of us are monolith. None of us think the exact same way. But we can bring that. We can contribute something great to your campaign and to what you're doing in your presidency. So thank you for having us, and we hope to continue to see us around you.
Yes, thank you, Rajon. Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. This is everyone. Thank you. This was
Representative
really
Pendarvis, thank you. This is one of the best conversations I've ever had, and just being able to listen and learn from experiences, and also learn about the foundational aspect of this, and then just what it's going to take to make it right, and who it's going to take to make it right, to your point. So thank you.
Thank you.
Really powerful. Yeah, appreciate it.